I'm going to turn the mic over to Esther.
Thank you so much, Karen.
You're welcome, Esther. I'm so happy about this.
Okay, so Karen asked me to prepare an artist statement, comments for my show. And so I'm just delighted to have all of you here. First of all, thank you all for
Don't
being
forget
here.
to hold the mic up close and leave it there.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate your presence. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my background, my influences, how I got kind of where I am today with my art, anecdotes about my life experience, and just tell you a little bit more about myself. Most of you already know a lot of this story. But anyway, I'm going to start with early Sumter in my education. So I grew up in Sumter, and I was surrounded by 13 beloved first cousins. All my first cousins on my father's side, the Sharp side, and my mother's side, the Bynum side, were in Sumter when I was growing up. They were really more like siblings than cousins to me. And their children are like my nieces and nephews, and I love them to pieces. I was just so lucky to be in such a great family. I had incredible elders, my Bynum and Sharp parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. And Betty Lou Birch and Eloise Missouri, who were constant presences in our household, were my mothers and my influencers as well. So when I was a child, I was an inveterate reader at the Carnegie Public Library. And everybody in my generation will remember that. Mrs. Greer, or Gear, I can't remember, kind of ruled that place with benign neglect. She'd kind of walk around, and if she saw you in the library, she'd say, "Oh, you like the Bobbsey twins? Well, try the Boxcar series. And if, oh, you like the Boxcar series? Try Nancy Drew. Try the Hardy Boys." And so that's how I got started. My mother would dump me in the library, and then I would get my books, hang out in the library, and walk down to her house on Church Street. And my parents, when it was lights out at my house, my parents would go, "Put your book away, go to sleep." And I would go, "Okay." And then I would go under my covers with a flashlight and read till I fell asleep. And I still read myself to sleep every night. But anyway, my parents fostered a lot of independence for me. I worked growing up at Suburban Propane Gas, which was my father's company. And I started out at age 12 licking stamps and envelopes for the invoices at 25 cents an hour. By the end of high school, I had skills and a checking account and savings account with enough money in it to realize that I could support myself and I didn't have to depend on my parents, and that gave me a big feeling of freedom, although that wasn't totally true. My boy cousins painted tanks in the summer at Suburban Propane Gas. They got to drive around in the countryside to paint the tanks, and that was a job I really wanted, but I liked it, so I was going. Also wanted to be a writer. I was inspired by the late, great Grady Locklear at Edmonds High School, and I later got to study with James Dickey at University of South Carolina, where I finished college. Well, after high school in Sumter, my parents packed me up to go to Converse College, and that's where I really started getting to be a little more interested in art. I'm going to discuss a little bit more my background in Sumter in just a second, but so they took me to Converse, and there was a professor there in the English department. I wanted to be a writer. I decided that. And the Osteen family was very helpful with being able to pursue my early writing career. But I wanted to be a writer, and I studied later at the University of South Carolina. I was able to study with James Dickey. But when we got to Converse, Dr. Stevenson, my advisor, my father requested an appointment with him, and he said, "Dr. Stevenson, when Esther graduates from Converse, I would like for her to be able to go out in the world and support herself and have a job." And Dr. Stevenson said, "Mr. Sharp, I suggest that you take Esther out of Converse and put her in a technical school." Thanks to my mother, I got to stay at Converse a little bit. So anyway, the highlight of my Converse years was a junior semester abroad in London, Amsterdam, and Paris in 1971. And the art teacher there, I wasn't in the art department, but the art teacher there, Melba Long, took us roaming through all the great museums in those cities, and And she taught us how to look at paintings. She would say, look at that Durer over there. Look at the way the lances that the horsemen are holding point toward the sunrise. And I would be like, okay. But I did learn to look at art and to appreciate art thanks to her. Okay, so who were my influences? Well, I was lucky enough to be the cousin of a famous artist from Sumter, Elizabeth White. She was a great painter. She was an etcher, and so some of you the gallery used to have some of her prints that you could buy right in the gallery. She was actually the founder of the gallery, and she went to the Philadelphia Academy of Arts and Columbia University to study painting, and she was born in the late 19th century, so before 1940, she was doing her art. She was a McDowell Fellow, and then she was also in the 1940 Venice Biennale. And my mother would take me to her house, and I would see her kitchen was just splattered with paint, and so I just had some early exposure through that. So I want to say something to y'all. If you ever get a chance, if you're interested in art and ever get a chance to go to the Venice Biennale, it's the coolest thing. It's every other year. It's in many of the old buildings in Venice, and they're just the coolest things in the world. The artists there are all chosen, are the up-and-coming, most famous artists there will be in the world, some of them, and they're chosen by artists who are already famous. And it's a really neat thing to go. Like, for example, you'll be riding on a boat through Venice, and you look to the right, and there's a huge arm sticking up, just as big as the boat, just sticking up out of the water, and that'll be some artist installation, and it things like that all over Venice, and I hope if you get a chance, you'll go. All right, so Elizabeth painted a baby portrait I loved of my best friend, Scott Rumpf, that hung in his house on Buford Street. In it, his face was dirty, and she captured his mischievous grin. And it was a bit shocking for the times. It wasn't a pretty portrait, but it captured a little boy in a way that I really hadn't seen before. So that was Elizabeth. Another one of my influences later was Jasper Johns. He's 94 years old now. He is the greatest living American artist in my opinion, and in many other people's opinion. And he was the valedictorian at Edmonds High School, right here in Sumter, right next door, in 1947. He lived after World War II with an aunt in Sumter, South Carolina. And he's a great part of our past here in Sumter. And a lot of people don't even know that he was a valedictorian at Edmonds High School. His paintings of maps, flags, targets, and letters inspired my first series, which is called Flagments. I bought my first art, a poster of one of his flag paintings, and had it framed from my apartment when I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the late 70s. Another one of my influences was Katie Levi, who can't be here with us tonight. She had to leave early, but she came earlier to say hi. And her family and Katie's cousin, Patty Barnett, gave me one of my first important pieces of art, a painting by Minnie Deschamps, another Sumter artist who I just adored the way she painted. She was an unschooled painter. She hadn't gone to art school, but her paintings were so alive and so full of color and so precise and just captured the rural area around Sumter. Katie's mother, Katie was an artist too, and some of her paintings were in our house, and they were light, full of color, just very inspiring for me. And Katie's mother was also an artist in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, is where she'd go for part of the year. And I thought, man, that sounds like a cool way to live. I'd like to be doing that one day. I took my first art class at Alice Drive Junior High School. But my friends in art, Betty Stuckey, Emily Roddy, and Carlin Gilmore, were such better artists than me, I really didn't pursue it anymore at the time. Little did I know that my education, travels, and the influencers in my life, some of the people I've already mentioned, would give me the tools to become the artist I am today. And Alice Brady and Betty were really the friends who kept bringing me to Pawleys Island, where by the time I was done with college, I was thinking, if I ever get to go back and live there, that's where I want to be. And I did realize that dream, and I've loved living there. Pawleys Island has incredible light and incredible birds. And it's a bird sanctuary. It's really neat. There's one sign on Pawleys Island, there's a painting of it right back there that says it's a bird sanctuary. So it really is a bird sanctuary. That sign over in the corner is back by the chapel. It's by the chapel at Pawleys. Okay, well, my Uncle Walter Sharp was a collector of Sumter artists, and he collected early Ray Davenport and Robert Courtwright, who was a collagist. I'm so sorry. And Walter's home where Dabney lives now is full of that beautiful art. Okay, in the 70s, Carolina Harvey Cantrell blew my mind. I was back working in Sumter in the 70s at the Sumter Daily Item. She blew my mind by breaking the mold of portrait painting in Sumter with full body renderings in natural positions. And my very progressive aunts, Pat, bye, and Anna Bynum had her paint Will Bynum and Louise Bynum, and these became my favorite portraits in my extended family. Carolina also lived and painted abroad later on the island of Nevis in the Caribbean, and later in her life before moving back to Sumter. So husband Farlow Blakesley and I took a class in Sumter with Carolina a couple of years ago. And in the portrait part of our class, she taught us a useful tool: paint the portraits upside down. It dissociates the eye from perception and gives a new perspective and a more correct perspective. I found that applies to other genres such as landscape, so I use that technique a lot. If you want more information, take a class with Carolina. I became a reporter in the Sumter Daily Item in the mid-70s. It was the era of Watergate, and I really thought that was what I wanted to do. But one of my essays that I was assigned to do at the paper was on Ranger McCoy, who had a sculpture that was on loan in the savings and on loan to a bank in Sumter, and it actually was the savings and loan. And I was mesmerized by his art then, and I still am. And behind there is a painting of one of Ranger's sculptures of an extinct bird, I think. So after Sumter, after Sumter and after college, I moved to Maine for a year, and I worked in Acadia National Park during the summer and Sugarloaf, USA in the winter. And again, the light was new to me in such a northern place, and it was beautiful, and it was, and it flavored everything about life there. And then a few years later, I met my first husband. His name was Michael Haggerty, and I met him in Maine, and I married him in Sumter, and we were together for over 15 years. And he was a graduate student at Harvard, and right as we were married, he had received a Fulbright fellowship, and that gave us the opportunity to move to southern France, Aix-en-Provence. And that town is in the shadows of the Mont Saint-Victoire, which Cézanne painted over and over and over again. And once again, the light was incredible. And I loved just being in that light and being in the place where so many great Impressionist artists had worked. Van Gogh was there, Moreau, Matisse. I studied French and Spanish, and it was just a magical time. We returned a year later to Paris, and my first son, Galen, was actually born in Paris. He's 44 now. And I took the time to study more about the Impressionists and their use of light. And if you really like the Impressionists and you get the chance to go to Paris, I really recommend that you go see their work in the best museum for seeing it in the world, which is the Musée d'Orsay. It's a train station on the Seine River that's been repurposed into an art museum. And what you do, I'm going to give you a secret, what you do is you go online to buy your tickets, and you go and you get the earliest time you can get in the morning, which I think is like 9:30. 9:30 is very early for the French. And you go, you stand in the line a little bit earlier, a little bit before that time, and then when you get in the museum, you go immediately to the top floor of the museum, and that is where the galleries of all the Impressionists are. And you will have probably 45 minutes to an hour to be in that gallery virtually alone. Whereas if you go in through the bottom and just look around in the rest of the museum before you get up there, it's going to be all crowded and you'll be bumping into people all day. So if you get to go there, do it that way. It's Okay, now, and a few years ago, I took my step-grandsons to that museum, and we did that same thing, and they were 12 years old, and even they were impressed. So anybody can be impressed if they do that. There's another museum in Paris called the Jeux de Paume, and it is the former tennis court of the kings of France. And in that museum, it's in the Tuileries Garden, which is part of the big park around the Louvre. And in that painting are the paintings of Monet. And once again, the light in those paintings is so incredible because the paintings were painted as he aged and as his eyes failed. So the treatment of the light on those, it's the lily pads. The treatment of light on the lily pads is really, really, really worth seeing. So anyway, one of my paintings back there is a riff on a painting of Monet, and it's the one of the white turkeys. So another thing that my husband did was he used his Harvard credentials to get us passes to see Lascaux, which is where all the cave paintings are. It had been closed to the public for a long time, and the only way you could go is if you got some kind of special dispensation. And I learned there about the importance of simplicity in art. And that was just an incredible experience to be able to do that. But supporting oneself and living well are two different avenues in life. So I decided when we got back to Cambridge to get an MBA. And during that period of time, I went to work. After I finished my MBA, I worked for a venture capital firm in Boston for about 10 years. Brigham Deliage. I had a fascinating career in finance, and I really loved every moment of it. But I was giving up on the dream of my husband becoming a professor and us being able to sort of continue that really neat life of going back and forth to Europe. He slipped into the abyss of addiction, which I was ill-equipped to deal with. My family members were teetotalers, and I wasn't used to that. I thought it was very attractive for quite a while, but in the end, it's a loser game. Anyway, we were divorced, and he did achieve his goal of being able to live in France, and he lives there today. But anyway, a few years later, after we divorced, I met another guy, Thomas Hearn, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at a marriage of a mutual friend. I married him after a couple of years and moved to Baltimore, and I lived there for 20 years. I had my second son, Tommy, there, raised both my kids, and they're still there. They love Baltimore, and they still live there. I love Baltimore too, but not as much as Pawleys Island. But I was like growing peonies in a garden out on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and that was a tough life for me. I kid you not. But during those years, I took respite in playing tennis, which my family loved. My uncles Henry and Aldous and sister Elise were playing back at home. My cousin Will was a star in high school and college. But sometimes cataclysm and heartbreak bring great changes, and that's been my experience in my life. After nearly 20 years, Tom fell in love with someone else. It took me 3 agonizing years to move on, and art was my savior. So about that time, I had a group of friends in Baltimore, and one of my friends got ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and she was took some time to go to Florida in the winter, and I with another friend went down to see her, and we were staying near yet another friend who lived there most of the winter. Anyway, Karen Morrill, one of my friends, who's sort of a cousin of Barlow, my husband, took canvases and brushes and paints, and she said, I'm going to teach you 3 things. I'm going to teach you how to do a bowl of flowers, a landscape, and a still life. And I said, okay, because she was trying to give our friend who had Lou Gehrig's disease and really only about 2 years to live, kind of something to do for a distraction. Well, it didn't take with her, but it did take with me. And by the end of the weekend, I said, Karen, I don't want to paint any of those things you suggested, but I'll do some abstracts. And I did 3 abstract canvases, which I still have, which were sort of geometric canvases. But they really became the basis for my first series of flagments that I mentioned before in in my comments on Jasper Johns. I picked up a paintbrush and I never put it down. I've painted almost every single day since I started in 2012, and that launched my career. After the heartbreak, I had a few tough years medically, kidney cancer, surgery and chemo, joint replacement, cataract surgery, loss of my parents. That was a great time to start building my house at Pawleys Island. So thanks to my sister, Elise, the great artist and inspiration to me, who helped me through all of this, I'd come down to visit my parents, who were by that time in Covenant Place, and then I would meet Elise down at Pawleys and stay there, and we would go take workshops with Bruce Chandler, who was an artist who lived in Sumter for a long time. She's I call her a fantastic free-range teacher, because you can learn so much from her about anything you wanted to learn.
And Bruce had an exhibition here in 2008.
And she loved Sumter, and I think Sumter really loved her, because she was a great teacher. But one thing that was fun about her was her sense of humor. And so if someone wandered into the studio when we were painting, we painted in the jail, the old jail in Georgetown, which was under the clock tower by the Rice Museum. And if anybody, we called ourselves the breakout school. And if anybody came in and wanted to find out from Bruce what she was doing, if they weren't signed up for her clinic, she would say, "If I told you, I'd have to kill you." And so we really always had a good time with her. She was so much fun. Okay, Elise and I are now working on a collaboration based on the flower paintings of Georgia O'Keeffe. So stay tuned, right, Elise? Okay, then around that time, Carlo, my husband, meandered into my life as I was completing my house at Pawleys, and we're once again inspired by Elise, but also cousin Elizabeth White. I built my dream studio, and those of you who've been to my house know that's the largest room in my house. Farlow got me through the construction process, which had stalled when I was sick. Now, in retirement, Farlow and I traveled together for art and tennis. He was born in Florida and was a child tennis prodigy. He won all the titles in his high school in New England. He's an ace needle pointer, too. I have to see Farlow's needle points. He creates amazing